Good morning. This is the Friday Fireside, and you'll never believe who I have here with me. This is Mark Hess. And for all of you who know Mark and have no idea what he does for a living, he's going to tell us because his business is changing. Mark, how are you?
I'm good, Rick. Thanks for having me on. This is going
to it's a thrill. And by the way, we don't know this is going to happen, but Mark and I might be working on a project together. We'll hear more about that in the future. But first, Mark, where are you speaking to us from?
I'm actually in Hilton Head, South Carolina.
Oh, you're back down there. Okay.
Yeah,
so you're bouncing back and forth.
Yeah, I'm bouncing back and forth a little bit. So
okay. And we appreciate the collection of Christmas plates behind you.
Thank you. I
should have taken them down. A beautiful view out the window, but it was blowing out the camera, so you had to move. So thank you very much for that.
You got it.
All right. So we want to know, first of all, what is your current title at Comcast?
It's Senior Vice President of Strategy and Industry Affairs for Comcast Technology Solutions, CTS.
There you go.
Okay. That's the group that sells Comcast technology to other entities.
I got that. I got it. Comcast invents it, uses it themselves, and then says, hey, this is something everybody could use. So you license it out, give or take, right?
Exactly.
That's very cool. All right. So, and you are retiring?
I'm retiring. Yep, I'm retiring.
Okay. This show will air on March 24th, and you're retiring the end of March, aren't you?
Yeah, 3/31 March. I'm counting the days at this point. Things are falling off my calendar.
Okay. So now we know what you're going to do somewhat. Yep. We'll come back to that. Your career in this business is a career of a history of the industry. And, we've got 22 minutes to talk. Mark, how did you get started in all this?
So 40 years ago, hard to believe, 40 years ago, I was working in State College, PA, which was actually where I was born and raised. And I was working at a golf course, and I decided I wasn't going to do that anymore. I've been out of college a year or so. And I got to know these guys from TCI, and Joe Wayman was the district manager, and they seemed to play a little more golf than most business guys I knew. And one day they said, Joe said, I'm going to teach you how to be run cable systems. I said, oh, that sounds good. Okay. And that's what it was. And it was back in the time, you remember John Malone at the time, I think, was buying like a cable system a week, right? And most of the time you'd take it over and someone, would say, it was mom and pop, here are the keys, right?
That's right.
So that's how I got started. And I ran cable systems in West Virginia and Pennsylvania and upstate New York, and finally in the Chicago suburbs, and then, upstate New York again. I ran a bunch of cable systems. So I did that for quite a while.
And your family got moved around as mine did.
Yeah.
And eventually said, come on, would you please stop this?
Yep. Even better, though, I actually remember the days when we went from like cable show to cable show.
All the small shows.
Every state had one, right?
I was constantly there, I
met my wife at the Greenbrier at the West Virginia cable show.
So there you see that.
There you go. So I mean, I'm like a child of cable, and it's like my whole life almost. Right?
Terrific. Okay, so TCI 12-ish years, and then was the conversion over, or the purchase, or whatever it was, to AT&T broadband, right?
Well, actually, there's a couple wings and wangs in there. So after running
a couple wings and wangs.
Yeah,
is that a cable technical term?
I came to a fork in my career once, and I took the fork. So it was so actually after running cable systems for a while, there was a job posting for something called the General Manager of Digital Compression, and it worked directly for Barry Marshall, who you remember Barry?
I do.
Yeah, he was the COO of the cable company at the time. J.C. Sparkman had kind of moved aside, and Barry was running. And one time he called me and said, I think you should apply for this. And I'm like, Barry, what the hell is the General Manager of Digital Compression? Because back then, cable, we didn't launch products.
Yeah.
Technologies, right?
Yeah, right.
But not long after that, John Malone came out with his 500 channel statement, and I'm like, oh, so that's what digital compression is. So, I kind of went from running cable systems to going out there to help launch launch digital TV, which was a hell of a lot of fun trying to figure out. We were doing, viewers' choice, trying to compare video on demand versus near video on demand. You remember, all that stuff.
I do.
We did it.
I do.
We did kind of a trial of what it might be like in Mount Prospect, Illinois. But then along the way, I got involved with the Sega channel.
How did that happen?
Well, it's, Barry was like, well, you're doing new stuff, so work on this too. So I said, okay, that's pretty good. So, and the more I got to know about it, Stan Thomas was the guy running it and the CEO. And it was a joint venture of TCI, Time Warner, and Sega. And the more I learned about it, better it sounded. And you had just said we moved our families too much. Well, my wife was not wanting to be in Denver anymore. She was jonesing for the East Coast and the ocean.
Yep.
So Stan was kind of like Tom Sawyer. Like, look how much fun I'm having painting this fence. So sure enough, I went to work there, which, at the time, it was like early 90s, 94, 93, 94, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
That was back when IPOs were popping and, I was going to get rich. It's going to be perfect. So not exactly as it was.
Right. And then somewhere along those lines in 99, which is about when I met you at, I believe, the Philadelphia Zoo, some CTAM event up there.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
I think I was in one of the cages and you were throwing red meat at me.
Yeah, I was on a panel with some, so you were probably.
So it was something like that. Yep. I was with them. I was with the middleware company back when we thought middleware would make money, called Morecom. Yeah. And you just joined Comcast, right?
Yeah, I started as their vice president of digital television.
Okay.
Which basically they'd already launched digital TV. They had about 500,000 customers. Now this was back when we only had, Comcast only had 5 million.
Right.
They kind of brought me in to say, well, what's next, right? So, that took us down the path of middleware, and you investigated WorldGate. Remember WorldGate?
I do. Hal Chrisberg, don't buy a used car from him. Yeah. I'm sorry, did I say that? No. Gerard Kunkel, he was better.
Gerard's the man. I love Gerard.
Yeah,
he's still doing a bunch of cool stuff too.
He's playing with the metaverse.
Yeah, exactly.
He's everything, everywhere, all the time.
Yeah, he's an avatar.
I got it.
So anyhow, they brought me in to do that, and we looked, as you were doing, we looked at everything, and lo and behold, as we talked about, it turns out the killer app on television was video. So
the killer app on television was television. What a big surprise that is.
There you go. I gotta give tribute to that. Mike LaJoy was the first guy that ever said that to me. So. But it was, that was the path to video on demand. It was like, okay, well, how do you make it different and better? And so that was the first thing. And my team was the people that did all the work. I never did anything really, Rick. I just kind of asked people to do stuff.
You were the guy that bought all those DCT 2000s, right?
Yeah, well, we had a bunch of those DCT 2000s.
And then you eventually shoved them in the trunk of an old Chevrolet and had them driven to Mexico.
I'm guessing.
I heard of them.
I'm guessing somewhere in the United States, probably even in a Comcast system, there's a DCT 2000 humming along, I would bet.
Well, I've got one as a doorstop upstairs. So.
There you go.
Along with my web TV box, by the way.
Yeah. So that was that was the first big project we did, as a team there. In 2001, I think we launched, and, it's funny. We didn't know what we didn't know, right? We just figuring it out. The very first sea change application in the set top actually tricked the DCT 2000 to send an upstream request because it was a store and forward box.
Yep, it was.
It was only supposed to send a request in the middle of the night, tell me what you did today. So, it was pretty fun. A lot of integration, a lot of sleepless nights. I remember one of the guys working for me built something called Couch Potato, and we said, well, how are we going to test this? And he figured out a way to just make this, video on demand, just request after request after request to kind of make it look like we were hitting that thing constantly. So, we just try to figure out how to harden it up, and it was a lot of fun.
I seem to remember about that time, and that was when I was with Morecom, and we had a bunch of Motorola ex-engineers and they would give me the app and they would ask me to break it.
Yeah.
And usually the way to break it was just kept hitting the damn button.
Yeah, no, I was,
You know,
Tom Jokers used to do that or unplug it, see what happened. But I mean, those were fun times. I mean, Becky Salingo and Steve Heave and Harry Reich. We kind of did it with about 5 or 6 people, and the real work was done by Sea Change, Motorola,
yeah,
Gemstar at the time, all
Yep.
the integration. And we were just making sure that it stayed on track. But it was funny. It's interesting. One time I remember we delivered our 1 millionth stream. And
1 millionth stream.
Yeah, so 1 million,
Okay.
we finally crested 1 million. I think we might have had launched in 2 systems by then. And I was up walking through the office. It was kind of late after work, and there's Mike Talent. I don't know if you remember Mike Talent. Mike Talent was like the CFO of Comcast Cable.
I do.
Highest cable IQ in the history of cable TV. So I poked my head in his office and I said, Mike, we just did our 1 millionth stream. And he looks at me and goes, he had a Southern accent. Goes, damn, Mark, that's interesting. But what does that mean, really? And I was kind of like taken aback. Here I am all excited.
Yeah.
And I walked away. And then the next day, of course, it's always the next day you figure out what you should have said. But the fact of the matter is, I should have said, hey, Mike, if I can do 1 million, I can do 1 billion.
Right.
And if I can do 1 billion, I can do 10 billion. And that's pretty much what's happened, right? I mean,
but the trick then was we did 1 million and we didn't crash all the boxes.
Yeah, exactly. So
thou shalt not crash the box.
I was not smart enough to come up with that.
All right. So then you spent some time, do I recall seeing TV Works was in there?
Yeah, no. So, we along the way, we launched high def and then we did our first DVRs, but we formed a joint venture with both Gemstar for a company we called Guideworks. And Gerard
Guideworks, not TV Works. Guideworks, right.
Guideworks. And well, actually, then we did form another one called TV Works because we were trying to chase that.
That was the Liberate acquisition, right?
Yep. We were trying to chase middleware because we really felt, you needed to have something in there so you could have multiple apps, right?
The problem was we were designing for a world only about 24 months in the future, and we should have had more vision.
Yeah. No, at the end of the day, it was a time when you thought software could do anything.
That's right.
But you were looking at a device that had very little memory and just enough processing power to do one thing really well: MPEG video.
Didn't we say it had the processing power of a first generation Nintendo?
Yeah, something like
maybe, and certainly the graphics power of that.
Yeah, no, not multiple colors and who knows what else. So we, that slowly evolved into, it took a while. We tried OCAP, right? And that was hard. And, I did remember putting up with Panasonic, our first television in a retail store, and, it didn't really go very far. And then eventually, and it was not really on my watch in the product side, we started to do stuff like X1. And Sri Kote and people like that sat down and said,
yep,
you know what? If you could start all over, what would you put in a set-top box?
See that, and that was key. That was key. Start all over, forget the truck full of boxes in the back.
Yeah. So I didn't, what would
X1 took a good old long time to get rolling, didn't it? And that thing seemed like it was in the lab for a long time.
Tony Werner used to say it's the longest overnight success he's ever been involved with. But,
there you go.
But it was not overnight. I mean, it took a long time. I mean,
we were still hard coding into the boxes.
Yeah, I mean, Comcast was still I mean, it wasn't the engineers working for me by that point, but they were blazing trails. So it's now, I don't know, 10, 15 years old. I mean, it's
hard to believe.
Yeah, it is hard to believe. And constantly going through updates and changes to make it better. But yeah, so along in there, they said, well, okay, Hess, you're not so much a great product guy. You were an integration guy. You could get other people to do stuff, but we need some real software engineers and software leaders. So that's when I started working for Tony more on industry stuff. A lot of people don't know I'm on this board of Addis. And Addis is essentially the quote unquote cable labs of the telecommunications business in a sense. A little more
Right.
than that. They do all the 5G work for 3G, 3GPP and all that. And I'm on the advisory board for the CTA. I'm on 2 different FCC, the CISRIC and the FCC TAC. I run the SCT. I'm chairman of the SCTE Foundation. Do stuff with the voluntary agreement around set-top box energy reduction. So I kind of moved into I like to call it old guy in cable.
Hey.
But I shouldn't say that. But
Not to me.
Not to me. I just turned 65. But essentially, that and helping with vendor relations, and then every once in a while a product would come along that we just needed to test and trial, and I was still good at that kind of thing. So, and then slowly, and then I got involved with what we call syndication, but we were at I think one of the last NCTA shows. It was one up in Boston, I think.
Yep.
And,
that was the last one.
And the guys at Cox came by and looked at X1 and said, is this for sale? We buy this. And Shaw did the same thing. They were there.
Yeah.
And so I was, kind of one of the early, since I knew everybody, I was one of the early people to help, some of the negotiations on those deals. So that kind of led me into the whole Comcast Technology Solutions Group, where I've been for a while, and it's been a lot of fun.
Well, that's good. Okay. So we're coming down to the end. So I want to get a little perspective. I personally have a view, and you can tell me that I'm completely full of beans. But when I look at a Comcast and I look at the margins that Comcast makes on the cable television product, which are abysmal, and I think about the possibility of using the Flexbox and other devices up there to simply resell Netflix and Apple TV Plus and Disney Plus and all the rest, and keep $1 every time somebody floats by on every bill, you're actually going to make more money on $40 or $50 of retail spend that way than you're making on cable. Why does that not happen?
Well, I think you're going to see
it
is slowly evolving. I mean, it took a while, but we finally recognized that, especially because the broadband business was so strong, that if someone's watching Netflix, that's kind of net positive for us, right? Because they need bandwidth, and we have it. What we've been able to do, and it's the product people, under Fraser Sterling, people like Janine Heck and Amit Bhaga, they've built really just an amazing source of data, and what we're going to, think of aggregator of aggregator. I mean, right now, what happens? You want to watch TV shows. You don't care what it's on.
That's right.
Don't care. And
I don't even know where it is. I just know that I watched it one time, and hey, Mark, I spent 15 minutes trying to find it again.
Right. I got this great show, right? Bloodland. I watched that on Acorn. It's pretty cool. It came through Amazon, and I don't know where it comes from. I just need to turn on my TV and look at my last watch column and see it there, and then have it switch over. Right?
But somebody has to be an aggregator or a super aggregator, whatever that phrase is.
If you said to me, you got to watch this show, I say it into my remote and I hit save. Now it's in my playlist, right? That's the kind of thing we got really smart people working on. And that's in Comcast DNA. That's what Comcast does, which I keep. Yeah. I'm a fan of the cable business, and so that you guys know how to market these products. Yeah, keep us in the living room, and there's still a ton of people watching linear television, right?
Yes, there are
a ton of them. So you can't kind of, and now fast channels. I mean, there's so much going on, so you got to have someone to make it make sense for you. And I think that's what we're striving to be. So you'll see more and more about that as we go on.
All right. Well, guess what? Mark Hess, that pretty much uses up our time. I want to tell the audience that not too long ago, you sent me a note and it said I looked like I was having a lot of fun doing these shows. And we got to talking, and we may, in fact, have a new show coming out. Working title is Inside Television, to give perspective on where the business was, where it is, and where it's going, with all the friends that Mark knows and friends that I know, and between us, we'll keep the show running for about 100 years. And that might, as I would say, God willing, and the creek don't rise, that might launch sometime this summer and give everybody yet another thing to watch. So guess what, Mark Hess, thank you for your time, bud. I appreciate it.
It was a lot of fun, Rick. Thanks for having me.
All right. And I will say to my friends, as I always do when we sign off, just be nice to each other.